Hello everybody and welcome to today's EAUC webinar in association with Soil Association-Scotland. The title of this webinar is Food for Life Served Here, Making Good Food the Easy Choice, and it will last approximately 1 hour. Thank you for registering, and thanks also to Sarah Dooley from Soil Association-Scotland's Food for Life team who will be speaking today. My name is Rebecca Petford and I am the Scotland Programme Manager here at the EAUC. If you have any specific event, webinar or training requests, please do get in touch with our team at any time. Just a little bit of housekeeping to go over now. I'm hoping that everyone can hear me well. I've muted you all to avoid background noise, and you'll continue to be muted throughout the webinar. If you're having any technical issues at all, please let me know by either posting in the on-screen chat box, which is bottom right on your screen, or sending me an email to rpetford@eauc.org.uk. If you haven't already done so, please make sure that your name is accurate by going into Participants at the bottom of the screen, hovering over your own name and clicking Rename. If you could include both your full name and your institution or organisation, that would be great. Because this is a presentation by Sarah followed by Q&A, there's no need for your webcam to be on. Feel free to turn it off if it's on already using the camera symbol bottom left on your screen. We'll take questions using the chat box. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please write them in the chat box and send them to EAUC-Scotland host using the drop-down menu. I will read them out to Sarah at the appropriate time, so please be as clear as you can in your questions. This webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded as a resource to our Sustainability Exchange with the presentation over the next few days. Please feel free to share these resources with any colleagues or fellow EAUC members. Once the webinar is finished, you'll be sent a short survey for us to gain your feedback. Please take a few minutes to complete the survey, as the results will help us to improve our events. That's all from me for now. Thank you again for registering, and I'll pass you over to Sarah Dooley.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks very much to Becca for the introduction and to the EAC for hosting the webinar today. As Becca said, my name's Sarah Dooley. I'm from the Soil Association in Scotland. The Soil Association is a UK-wide food and farming charity, and I work on the Scottish Government Food for Life Scotland funded programme. So I'll tell you a little bit more about Food for Life in a minute. But just to say, I know there are people joining today from across the UK, and so there will be a bit of a Scottish slant because I work on a Scottish government funded project. But Food for Life Served Here, which is the main topic for the webinar, is a UK-wide scheme, so it should be relevant for everybody. And I will have some contacts that I can share with you at the end of the webinar if you're joining from England or Wales. So just to move on to the next slide. Sorry, there we go. It's just a bit of a delay in the PowerPoint there. So today we'll be exploring sustainable food and food procurement in the context of a further or higher education setting, and how Food for Life Served Here can help your organisation. So just on the screen now is a brief overview of what we'll cover. An introduction to Food for Life, the context for sustainable food globally and in Scotland, some strategic drivers for sustainable food specifically for your sector, a bit on consumer demand for sustainable food, and then a section on what Food for Life Served Here is and how it can help with all these other things. This is definitely a starter for 10. There's so much more detail we could go into with all of these topics, but hopefully it'll get you thinking. And we know there's lots of great practice happening out there already in universities, so this is just about how Food for Life can help join that up, and you can use it as a framework to build a platform for sustainable food in your organisations and institutions. So just on the screen there is the Food for Life Scotland mission. We're working to make good food the easy choice for everyone. We make sure good food is not only on the menu, but it's part of the conversation and a way of life in all sorts of settings, from schools to hospitals, care homes, workplaces, universities and colleges, and cities more generally as well. And we believe that good food holds the key to healthier people, a thriving economy, and a greener environment. So we run quite a lot of different sort of programs and tools within our Food for Life Scotland approach, and this diagram on the screen just gives a flavour of that. So we're working from the outside ring in terms of national policy to area-wide strategic leadership for good food, facilitating community partnerships. We also work on supporting organisational leadership to promote good food and good food education. We instigate and facilitate good food experiences, and then also the middle section and the food supply is what we're going to be focusing on today. That's where Food for Life Served Here comes in, and we use that as a framework and as a tool to help organisations across Scotland and, as I said, in the UK, because Food for Life Served Here is a UK-wide scheme to deliver good food. And you might hear me refer during this webinar quite a lot to good food or to sustainable food. So I just wanted to touch quite quickly on what good food means to us. So this slide just demonstrates
Maybe I should take this off
quite broadly the three areas which we think good food comes in. So food that's good for your health. That will be things like lots of fruit and vegetables, fish and whole grains, less but better quality, and a lot less meat and a lot less processed food. And we also, coming into that good food experiences side of it, good food is even better when it's shared, and it can have an impact on your well-being as well as your health. So the second point there, food that's good for the environment. So that's in season, sustainably produced, low climate impact, high animal welfare standards. Food that's good for the economy. So that would be food that's grown by local producers, prepared by skilled and knowledgeable people, and food that supports a thriving economy. So that's kind of what Food for Life's definition of good food is, and what I'll be kind of meaning as I go through this presentation today. So the bit of context and setting the scene, a lot of this will probably be familiar to many of you if you're sustainability professionals, or even if you're not. It's kind of things that we hear more and more in today's society, but just some useful context as to why food is important, and to show just how much it can contribute as well, and how much it can actually affect the kind of societal challenges that we're facing today. And I think sometimes there's an overlooked area in sustainability where energy, waste and transport and these kind of things come to the fore, perhaps because they're easier and less emotive, but easier to understand, easier to action, but they're also it also avoids the kind of the power that food has. So moving on from that, food can change lives, and I really like this quote from the Soil Association chair, Dennis Overton, which just quite simply states that food, what we eat, how we get it, and where it comes from can change lives, and that good food can help us deal with some of the most pressing social, economic and environmental concerns. And these are concerns that are not just in Scotland, they're not just in the UK, it's kind of global issues that we're kind of talking about here, as well as what's impacting us on a local context. So a couple of slightly sad slides maybe, but really the food system is broken at the moment. Industrially farmed food has meant cheap food, but at what cost? And we're seeing lots of these issues more and more in Scotland, in the UK and across the world. So we've got things like the decline of family farms, deforestation and soil erosion, animal welfare abuses, contaminated soil and air pollution, more genetic modification, labour abuses, a public health crisis, a loss of biodiversity, there's lots of things we could go into here, and lots of different kind of statistics that I've got here as well, which demonstrate this. Some of the most dramatic ones are 1 in 3 children are obese, food accounting for 30% of the UK's carbon footprint, food and agriculture. One quite shocking one that I found out just while I was actually researching this was that 3/4 of the world's food today comes from just 12 crops and 5 animal species, which is really quite surprising, and just shows the what demonstrates what the kind of industrial system has kind of done to our food system, and the variety that we used to have. But the kind of other side of that is that consumers in some ways have never had it better. The average people spend on food is 11% of their income, which is dramatically lower than it used to be. But what that actually means is that the true costs of food are not really accounted for, and the cheap food is really not the food that's good for us. It's the food which is contributing to the public health crisis, the obesity issues that we're seeing. And just a couple of other slides just to follow on from that. Food and farming responsible for up to 1/3 of global emissions, and that was pretty much the same for the UK as well, as I just mentioned. I mentioned obesity, but in general, the NHS spends about 5.8 billion a year treating illnesses caused by a bad diet, and that's an insane amount of money. But yeah, it's not all bad. The food system is in trouble. There's issues there which affect everybody across the world, but we also have a lot of the answers as well. The power of good food is really really key, and sustainable food and farming can do a whole range of things and tackle a whole range of those other problems which have actually been caused partly due to the way food has been produced in recent history. So if we're looking at a sustainable food and farming model, that can provide meaningful employment, enhance quality of life and equality, can prevent soil erosion, it can protect ecosystems and prevent global warming. We can look at addressing the public health crisis, and we can increase biodiversity and food security. And that's kind of where the Food for Life mission comes in. Again, we're really looking at using food to create a healthier people, a greener environment, and a thriving economy. So these just some pictures to demonstrate that: a healthier people who are more engaged with their food, they're more aware of what a healthy diet might be, they're more connected to the food that's being produced, and a greener environment where there's a range of good biodiversity, where the farming system is helping to mitigate climate change rather than contributing to it, and where animals have a good quality of life. And also a thriving economy where there's jobs in the food system which are jobs which people want to have, which support them well and can contribute to a local economy that is well functioning. So as well as that kind of setting, that setup, the global context, the current food system is facing a lot of challenges. There's a lot of things which we need to address as a society, and which universities and colleges can help to do that. And as you can see, as hopefully I've, as I say, we're going over these things quite quickly in quite a broad brush approach, but we do have some of the answers. We know how we could improve things, and it's a matter a lot of the time of putting into practice. And this is beginning to be recognised and incentivised at a strategic and policy level. So I just wanted to touch on some of the strategic drivers or policies that encouraging organisations, but including universities and colleges, to take steps to play a role in this situation. So just a few. Again, this isn't an exhaustive list. There's quite a lot of things which food can help to address. a lot of policies which food helps to address, but a few that I just wanted to highlight today. The Procurement Reform Scotland Act has a lot of contains a lot of information about how food and the production and provision of and procurement of food specifically can contribute to a more sustainable society. There's a lot of guidance within that act which food and the way we as institutions or as organisations source and buy our food can contribute to. And Food for Life Served Here, as I'll go into in detail later on, provides a kind of a framework to help report on those requirements, such as having a procurement strategy for your organisation, such as looking at sourcing food that is of the highest level of animal welfare, these kind of things. Food for Life Served Here is essentially acting as a way of reporting on some of these things. And similarly for the Climate Change Scotland Act, the reporting duties that are placed on different bodies in Scotland in particular, food is not a huge part of this, but the way you're procuring and sourcing food and dealing with food as an institution has a lot of potential to mitigate and reduce climate change emissions. So it's not something so it's definitely something to bear in mind in that setting as well. And then also another Scottish focused document here, unfortunately, but the Scottish Government has this ambition to become a good food nation, and that is encompassing all walks of life across Scotland, everywhere from individual schools, individual people, to organisations and institutions like universities and colleges. And that's going to be quite an interesting process over the next few years to see whether and what a Good Food Nation bill might look like. But it's fair to say that Food for Life Served Here and the requirements that, again, I will go into, the requirements of that award will help organisations and anyone looking to support the Scottish Government's ambition to be a good food nation and to embed that in their own institutions. It provides a great framework to do that. And then, as well as that kind of sort of legislation and reporting side, the kind of broader policies and guidance. I've obviously just mentioned the Good Food Nation. There's also organic ambitions, the plan for public procurement, the balanced scorecard, which is more a Westminster, more relevant for England and Welsh universities possibly, but Food for Life Served Here is endorsed within that plan for generally guaranteeing good or excellent performance by caterers against the award criteria in the balanced scorecard. So that's something to bear in mind as well. And this is definitely not an exhaustive list at all. There's a huge range, particularly of Scottish policies, which link to food and health, the Scottish dietary goals, supporting healthy choices, beyond the school gate in schools. There's a range of public sector guidance and information, catering for change, buying food sustainably in the public sector, going into the Community Empowerment Act, even Low Carbon Scotland. There's a range of policies and guidance from all elements of government policy, from economic to health and to environment, that Food for Life can tap into and help you contribute to. So yeah, not an exhaustive list, but just trying to give you a sense of the strategic drivers and policies that could encourage you to move towards a more sustainable way of operating, and then using Food for Life Served Here as a framework to help you deliver on that, and as a platform, as a kind of a springboard to do more and more and embed sustainable food as much as possible across your institutions. So this, just a quick quote, the Soil Association's Food for Life Scotland programme is one way to put sustainable, healthy food right at the heart of communities and will contribute to Scotland becoming a good food nation. So this was said by Richard Lockhead, the former Cabinet Secretary for for food and drink as a remit, and just to highlight that sustainable healthy food needs to be put at the heart of communities and of your communities as a kind of as a sector, as well as your further and higher education sector, as your individual organisations and institutions, embedding sustainable healthy food at all levels of kind of how you interact and how you're set up as an organisation is really important, and it's probably the best way to ensure that continues, as you know, sustainability teams change, as caterers come and go. If the sustainable food is embedded as just a way of life, kind of coming back to the Food for Life mission, it becomes easier and easier and just normalizes that process so that it's just what people expect. And so this is a really beautiful picture, but I just wanted to talk here about the kind of the role that the further and higher education sector has to play in the food chain. We've talked about the strategy and policy drivers for good food, but yeah, Food for Life can also support you with that role that you might see for yourselves. Universities are procurers and providers of food to over a huge amount of students a year, and education institutions from Food for Life works with early years as well, early years to tertiary sector. Education institutions have a responsibility to address the sustainability and carbon intensity of their food supply chains, and I think that's important whether it's provided internally or through contractors as well. And really the kind of key universities are really key to shaping behaviour change in the choices we make regarding our attitude to food. And I think that idea of choice is quite an interesting one. Food for Life's main aim is to make good food the easy choice, and that needs to be something which obviously individuals do, but it's also with regard to the environment that those individuals are in. You might have heard the term the obesogenic environment used before, but this kind of idea that the environment that we live in is contributing to the way that we choose food and the way that we access different types of food. And the obesogenic environment essentially means that we just have ready access to cheap, unhealthy and processed food, and little or no access to fresh fruit and vegetables. And I think all organisations and kind of settings across Scotland and the UK have a responsibility to try and make sure that they aren't creating obesogenic environments. And although it's really important to give people choice, and that's something which will always be a priority especially for universities and colleges, we need to kind of bear in mind the role that we might play in doing that, and that the food that's served up in our public institutions, whether that's schools or hospitals or care homes or universities, kind of sets the tone for the way our nation interacts with food, and the kind of collective relationship that we have with food. And at the moment that is quite clearly veering towards the obesogenic, the industrial systems that I kind of referred to earlier on. So I just wanted to talk through that, and also just emphasize the kind of the power of the public plate and how public organizations can sort of reaffirm that access to good food, and we can kind of use good food together to tackle Scotland's health inequalities, to ensure that we have a sustainable food and farming system, and that particularly procurement and the way institutions, organisations procure their food can drive demand for sustainably produced food, and that in turn is boosting the local economy, encouraging better environmental outcomes, and essentially is actually one of the most effective mechanisms for driving transformation in food production and supply. And through that, and by working together and using procurement, we can generate shorter, greener, fairer supply chains, which result in farmers like Bruce here from Pillars of Hercules to have a kind of a sustainable market for their environmentally produced food, environmentally friendly food production. So just to touch again on consumer demand, this is very much, again, where kind of making good food the easy choice comes in. It needs to be available and people will choose it. But if it's not accessible, then they are, they are more likely to take what's on offer. So I wanted to just show a couple of slides on what university students, what young people generally are saying about sustainable food. So TUCO, you might all be aware of TUCO, the University Caterers Organisation. I've done quite a lot of research recently with food trends analysts, the food people, and I think if you're a member of TUCO, you can actually access the full report. But there are a couple of tweets that I just pulled out, which highlight some of the findings. Local is mainstream. Consumers want food and drinks grown and produced locally, which results in less damage to the planet. They're more aware of the impact they have on the environment, and are looking for ethical standards. And as I keep referring to, I will tell you how Food for Life Served Here provides a mechanism to ensure that your institution is doing these kind of things. We've also got Eating Better, which is an organisation promoting a fair, a green and healthy future, but they cite a YouGov research study that shows 44% of British people are willing or already committed to cutting down meat. So there's a clear trend towards this idea of flexitarianism, or indeed vegetarianism and veganism. This research is from the food people as well. So millennials, they want healthy, natural food. They like to cook and prepare meals. They support alternative food distribution, and they want to buy from environmentally conscious manufacturers and purveyors, and they want transparency. This report is a wealth of information actually on this subject, and I could probably do a whole, the report itself could be a webinar, but it talks a lot about some of the trends as well, a healthy trend towards healthy food, meat consciousness, traceability. It talks about Generation Z making up 40% of the buying public in the US, the EU and BRIC countries, so really shaping the future of food service, and that would obviously impact universities and colleges as well. But the report also kind of goes into the benefits of sustainable diets to business. And I know quite a lot of you are probably listening thinking, this is a lot of things that we already know, but how do we kind of put that into practice, and how do we make the business case for that? And this report is really useful for that. So it talks about how sustainable diets can deliver turnover growth, mitigate risks and increase resilience, maintain and improve profit margins. And so it is, well worth a read. It talks about short-term reputational benefits and long-term future-proofing as well. So I would definitely highlight that. And then there's also various research conducted by the NUS. They do a sustainable food survey, which has some good statistics around what students' kind of attitudes, awareness and behaviours are with regard to food. But one of the key things that came out of that as well was that over kind of the flip side to demand, which is awareness, they found that half of their respondents said they would change their food purchasing habits if they knew more about about the food that they're receiving and how that affected the environment. So I think there's also a role for organisations and institutions and government and everyone involved in the system to ensure that consumers are not buying food without knowing the consequences of the food that they're, the impact that the food that they're buying. I thought that was a really interesting kind of flip side to the demand. So we are seeing an increase in awareness, an increase in demand from young people, from students, but there's also needs to be a recognition that actually there needs to be even more awareness and education, so that we can continue that trend, I suppose. And so we're now getting into Food for Life served here, and just to give you a bit more of a flavour of what that actually is and how that can translate to all the different things that we've just been talking about. So very broadly, it's a nationally established and independent award scheme. So it's a certification award scheme. It's supported by the Scottish Government and also by, it's referenced in various UK policies as well. It's a clear framework for making changes and is a platform to build other sustainable food-related activity. It's independently assessed criteria and is an on-site annual inspection. And there are 3 levels of award to support continued progress. At the moment, over 1.7 million bronze, silver or gold meals are served across the UK in lots of different settings. We're working with around 40 universities across the UK, 2 awards in Scotland at the moment, the University of Edinburgh and actually Queen Margaret University as well. And then in the rest of the UK, there's a range, 10 gold awards, 12 silver and 28 bronze. So there's quite a lot of activity happening already, but there's definitely scope for more. So these are the award levels, bronze, silver and gold. The entry level bronze in the top is concerned with delivering fresh and traceable food which meets nutritional guidelines. There are 12 actually for the university and colleges sector, 12 standards which you have to demonstrate how you're meeting those standards. And then at silver and gold, it's assessed slightly differently. The focus is on the use of ethical and environmentally friendly food. It brings in a requirement for organic sourcing. It rewards locally sourced food and steps to offer healthier menus. And that is assessed on a points-based system rather than the 12 blanket standards at bronze. But across all 3, the principles are the same. We're sourcing environmentally friendly and ethical food. We're making healthy eating easier, and we're championing local food. So this is just an example of one of the marketing materials that we produce, but Food for Life Scotland helping you to tell a story about your food and making good food accessible and easy to choose, using the award to communicate back to consumers to reassure those that are interested, that have that demand, that this is what you're doing, but also encouraging others who are maybe not aware of that yet, of what you're doing. And it kind of, again, sort of normalizing that process and normalizing the idea of sustainable, local, seasonal food. There's a few case studies available on our website, so please do have a look at those once the webinar's over and the information has been sent out. There's a link there that you can click through, but I won't go into that in too much detail just now. One thing to flag, I'm going to go through the standards briefly in a second, but just to highlight as well that if any of you are working with the NUS Green Impact Scheme, there is a catering tab, a catering part of that scheme, which we've been working with the NUS to ensure that our standards are aligned to, well, to ensure that their standards are aligned to Food for Life served here, so that if you're already doing that, if you're already working towards the Green Impact catering tab or already linked to Green Impact, you'll be uniquely placed to kind of achieve the Food for Life served here standards as well. So we're really trying to join things together for the further and higher education sector as well and make it a bit more streamlined framework to do that. So just to give you a flavour of the bronze standards, we have 12 standards which mostly structure around ingredients, good practice and customer care. So ingredients would cover things like all eggs being free range, no genetically modified ingredients, no undesirable additives or trans fats, animal welfare standards being met, no endangered fish being served. And good practice would cover things like 75% of dishes on a menu being freshly prepared using unprocessed ingredients, training for staff, free drinking water, that kind of thing. Customer care being more around meeting dietary and cultural needs of customers, positive marketing around where ingredients are coming from, and that seasonal ingredients are used and highlighted. So encompassing quite a breadth of issues that kind of relate to what we've already spoken about, and just building that baseline for organisations and institutions to follow and then kind of improve on as well. So on the menu, we've got things like, we would have things like QMS or Red Tractor, Quality Meat Scotland, that is if you're in Scotland, or a Red Tractor meat, free range eggs, seasonal food. Off the menu, there would be none of these artificial undesirable additives or trans fats. The red box is the fish to avoid list, so we wouldn't have anything on that list on any of the menus. So that's just a flavour of bronze. Silver and gold, as I said, is that using a points-based system which takes into account your spend for these kind of products. So any products that are environmentally and ethically friendly, you would get rewarded for your spend on those products, and also for your spend on local. If you're in Scotland, as you can see from that map, that is classed as the whole of Scotland. If you're in other parts of the UK, it's your county and the adjacent county. And then also you get points. This is not related to spend, but you get points for actions taken to make healthy eating easier. So some of the examples are on the screen there. And we actually have a refresh of these standards coming soon. So there will be additional things, actions that you could take and that you would be rewarded for in due course. I can talk more about that at a later date if that's of interest. So that's really just a kind of quite a whistle-stop tour, because I'm keeping an eye on the clock as well. I want to make sure there is time if anyone wants to ask questions of the standards. There's obviously a range of kind of issues covered in the standards, but what I really find Food for Life Served Here as the fantastic thing to build that framework, to build that baseline, ensure that approach to sustainable food is embedded across your organisation, and then also providing a platform for other food-related activity that you can build upon. So it's really a journey and a framework that can just help you to take more and more steps along that kind of path to a more sustainable food system. A few of the impacts that we found through the Food for Life Served Here award in a range of settings. This isn't specific to universities, but it would apply as well. Increased access to fruit and vegetables. The graph shows an increase in freshly prepared food after involvement with Food for Life. Economic impacts. We had a social return on investment study done, which showed that 4.41 of pounds of social value for every £1 invested over 3 years was achieved if you were using a Food for Life Served Here menu. Driving demand for, obviously, if you're in Scotland, Scottish produce or local produce more generally. Workforce skills and morale. We've had a lot of feedback around how Food for Life has kind of impacted on job satisfaction and on skills of people working in the catering industry and in organisations. That kind of just links to the last slide in terms of supporting supply chains. We're looking at really trying to shorten and simplify the supply chain as well, and that's something which sustainable procurement and some of the legislation in Scotland is looking at doing as well. And then the environmental impacts as well. Silver and gold drives demand for organic, which has various environmental benefits from climate change mitigation and animal welfare, as well as some health impacts as well, with organic milk and meat having a huge amount more, proven amount more, I think 40% of more omega-3 fatty acids than non-organic. Also sustainable fish increasing, and looking at introducing more meat-free days, which obviously has a kind of a big impact on the environmental impact of anyone doing university or any catering at all. Yeah, really looking at through environmental and economic impacts, generating a shorter, greener and fairer supply chain, which works for everyone who's interacting with the food. So everyone from the person who's grown it to the person who's eating it and everywhere in between. Food for Life served here is helping you to kind of focus on that and improve that system. So yeah, coming to the end of the presentation now, but please do work with us and help to make good food the easy choice. I know, as I said at the start, there is a huge amount of good practice going on already in universities and colleges and in other sectors, but embedding Food for Life served here can really raise the platform and raise the profile of sustainable food in your organisations. And as I said, I think I said earlier on in the strategic drivers section, but public procurement and the way any public organisation procures food can have a really transformative effect on food production and the supply chain, and then in turn on human health and our human relationship with food. So yeah, we'll move on to kind of Q&As and thank yous. But I also just want to put up this last slide just in case there's anyone from any of these areas. I'm the Food for Life served here development manager for Scotland. So please do get in touch with me if you have any further questions, if you're in Scotland or on the Food for Life Scotland programme generally. But this is a list also of my colleagues who are working in England and Wales, who would be delighted to assist with any queries as well. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So could everybody please type any questions you've got into the chat box and send them to Rebecca Petford, EAUC-Scotland, which is down as the host, using the drop-down menu, and I'll then read them out to Sarah to answer. Just as a quick note, if anybody hasn't already named themselves as their real name, it'd be really helpful if you could do so. Please go into participants at the bottom of the screen, hover over your own name, and then click rename, and include both your full name and institution, just so we know where all the questions are coming from. So we've got a couple of questions to get started with. So for the first one, Sarah, are there any key aspects that you think are important to highlight when you're trying to get senior management buy-in to work towards Food for Life accreditation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's something which I come across on quite a regular basis with lots of different organisations. I think possibly the main thing which I try and highlight in terms of senior buy-in is the range of issues and policies and kind of things that they might have to report on or kind of refer to that food can impact. So that the whole the kind of myriad of benefits and areas that you can link food to. So you know, if you're enacting Food for Life served here, if you're taking steps to improve the sustainability of the food you serve, then that is having an impact on all the kind of things I've mentioned today and more: climate change, health, the local economy, this kind of awareness and health and well-being of the students that you're kind of caring for, or well, not caring for, supporting. I think it kind of provides that platform to bring all that together, and that's always something which is quite eye-catching to senior management. If you can showcase how that one thing can do all these other things and have all those other impacts, yeah, I think that's probably the main thing I'd highlight for a senior buy-in.
Excellent, thank you very much. So we've also got a question from Maria from University of St Andrews, and she says that you mentioned the Food for Life is aligning its assessment criteria to that of the NUS Green Impact, but St Andrews is currently working towards a bid for the Sustainable Restaurants Association Award, and do you collaborate with them at all, or are you trying to align with them in any way?
We're not currently aligned as such with the SRA. We are my kind of colleagues in Bristol, where the Soil Association head office is, do have a relationship with the SRA, but it's not something we're currently aligned with. No.
Brilliant, thank you. And we've got one more so far. If you have any more questions, please do type them into the chat and send them either to everybody or to me directly, which is Rebecca Petford, EAUC-Scotland. So the next question we have is, what are the first steps in the process of attending Food for Life certification if you've been inspired by this talk?
So the answer to that is slightly different if you're in Scotland or if you're in the rest of the UK. If you're in Scotland, then the next step would be to get in touch with me, and I can come out and do a kind of initial sort of gap analysis kind of process with you, go through what your practices are at the moment, work with your, I think a lot of the people who've registered are sustainability professionals, so work with you and your catering department to see to undertake a gap analysis benchmarking process, and see where you are. But then there's a whole range of support I can provide after that in terms of either then, if you're already meeting the standards, then applying and working towards the inspection, and helping with the promotion and raising awareness and the kind of celebration of that, or in terms of supply chain development to help you find products that do meet our standards, or staff training to make sure the staff that you're working with know why this is important and what the standards actually mean for the food that they're preparing. So there's a range of different things that I can do first off in Scotland, and really the first step if you're in the rest of the UK is to get in touch with one of the people on the screen there who can provide very similar kind of support as well.
Great, thank you. And we've actually got a comment here, which is from Amy and Spella at the University of Strathclyde. And they say that the hospitality catering team at Strathclyde has been working with Sarah over the last year towards the bronze accreditation, and they're due an audit soon. And the catering service is based in the conference venue, and they believe that this kind of accreditation would give them an edge over other venues, as potentially more and more customers are looking at sustainability credentials when choosing venues. So that's something that they'd highlight as a sort of particular advantage of this award. Do we have any final questions from anybody? I'll just give you a minute or so to type any last questions in. Okay, brilliant. Well, if we get any questions over just as I'm finishing up, then we will read them out. If you have any following this webinar, you can, of course, send them to us and we can forward them to Sarah and get a bit of feedback and send them back to you. So if you need to do that, our email address is scotland@eauc.org.uk. Thank you very much to Sarah for your input today, and to you all for tuning in and for all the questions. We will email you all a link to the podcast over the next few days, so you can refer to it at a later date and also share it with any relevant colleagues. Please do remember to complete the feedback survey when you receive it. Thank you again for joining us.